US President Donald Trump has made no secret of his desire to make Greenland part of US territory. And for the first time, the White House has confirmed that if need be, the administration is prepared to use military force to take it. And so on Tuesday night, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt issued this statement to the media. So she said, President Trump has made it well known that acquiring Greenland is a national security priority of the United States, and it's vital to deter our adversaries in the Arctic region. The president and his team are discussing a range of options to pursue this important foreign policy goal. And of course, utilizing the US military is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal. Always an option anywhere in the world against anyone. That seems to be the message. Others in Trump's administration were quick to talk down the military threat, though. So the Wall Street Journal reports that in a closed briefing to US lawmakers, Secretary of State Marco Rubio downplayed the possibility of military action. Instead, he said that the US plans to buy the territory, and the more aggressive rhetoric from the White House was a negotiating tool. That was somewhat backed up by the French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, who spoke directly to Rubio. He told France Inter Radio this. So he said of Rubio, he ruled out the possibility of what just happened in Venezuela happening in Greenland. Whatever form the intimidation takes and whatever its origin, we have begun work to prepare ourselves to retaliate, to respond, and not to respond alone. If Rubio is right, and this is actually just sort of an attempt to purchase Greenland, it wouldn't be the first time a US president has tried to buy the territory. We found this out because of, well, not us personally, but this became known because of documents declassified in 1991. They show that in 1946, the administration of Harry Truman offered Denmark $100 million in gold for the island. Now, unlike Trump, they did it in total secrecy. They didn't just tweet it out. I didn't have Twitter then, but they didn't sort of just make these public statements. And that's because they were afraid of alerting the Soviet Union to their plans. And there was also no military threat from the Americans. But even with Rubio's assurances, it's difficult to overstate the significance of the White House so much as tabling the option of military force in Greenland. So even if it is just the case that they want to buy it and this is just tough talk, that's still pretty crazy. And that's because Greenland is still part of the Kingdom of Denmark. And Denmark is a NATO member. Of course, the United States is the leading NATO member. So this is a NATO member threatening military force against another NATO member, which makes it unclear what would happen if you sort of invoke Article 5, because Article 5 is if one member of NATO is attacked, then you all come to their defense. But if a NATO member is being attacked by a NATO member, who knows? Earlier this week, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen spelled out what an attack on Greenland would mean.
Firstly, I believe that the American president should be taken seriously when he says that he wants Greenland. But I also want to make it clear that if the United States chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops. That is including our NATO and thus the security that has been provided since the end of the Second World War. I believe in democracy and I believe in the international rules. Of course, I also believe that you do not change borders by force either one way or another. It is not only the position of Denmark and the Danish kingdom, fortunately, of Europe too. So I hope that the people will also take note of the once again significant European support that we are receiving.
The foreign ministers of both Denmark and Greenland, which is a sort of it's an independent state to some degree, self-governing, but part of the Kingdom of Denmark. So they have their own foreign minister. The foreign ministers of Denmark and Greenland have been requesting meetings with Marco Rubio. That had been denied. But Rubio, just before we went live, actually, announced that meeting will now take place. It'd be good to be a fly on the wall in that discussion. Meanwhile, European leaders have been loudly voicing their support for Denmark and Greenland, with Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Poland and Spain issuing a joint statement saying they would defend, quote, the sovereignty, territorial integrity and the inviolability of borders. Obviously not the borders of Venezuela, but when it comes to their close allies. French, German and Polish foreign ministers are also meeting today to discuss a joint response to a possible US invasion of the territory. Meanwhile, the 56,000 Greenlanders who inhabit the island are finding their new reality hard to believe, as former Greenland politician Tilly Martinussen told Channel 4 News.
magnitude of what is happening that, the future of Greenland could decide the fate of NATO.
We are aware, however, we are, I think, even in more disbelief than maybe the European countries are, that U.S. is threatening its allies since World War II, where they were the heroes. I mean, every movie that ever came out of that country, America is the hero, and all of a sudden they're now the villain. We just can't believe that. Greenlanders talk amongst each other. Some are frightened. Most are so angry, I can't even tell you the choice language that they use on social media. Demagogue is probably one of the nicer words that they use about him. Treating us like prostitutes and something we can just take over is also some of the nicer words that have been used about it. It's very disheartening that a country I have been to and been traveling to so many times for vacation, I think 13, 16 times. I love America. All of a sudden it's not our friend, but an opposing force. That is wild. How can we live in this world?
So why is Trump so keen on taking Greenland? Well, he says it's for reasons of national security, and he's been saying that for a while now.
We need Greenland from a national security situation. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. And if you choose, we welcome you into the United States of America. We need Greenland for national security and even international security. And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
So does any of this stack up? Well, Greenland, the world's largest island, it does undeniably occupy a strategically significant location. So you can see it's on its borders, it's got Canada, Alaska, Russia, and the Nordic states. So it's sort of the shortest route between Russia and the United States. People think it's significant in terms of warnings for if a ballistic missile were coming from Russia to the United States. Washington already has military bases there, though, and the right to build new ones and increase its presence there if it wants to. That's partly because it's an ally anyway, or it was until recently. It's also thanks to a treaty. So the fuel agreement, which was signed between Denmark and the US in 1951, I suppose presumably as a compromise when they tried to buy it, and updated in 2004 to include Greenland's semi-autonomous government. So this deal means that they already have very close connections. Researcher Mikkel Runge Olesen told the New York Times this. The US has such a free hand in Greenland that it can pretty much do what it wants. I have a very hard time seeing that the US couldn't get pretty much everything it wanted if it just asked nicely. So they're allies, they've got these deals. If America wants to open new military bases, they probably can. Maybe they'd welcome the investment. I don't know. So sort of confusing what the rationale here is. According to Danish MEP Anders Vistisen, Trump's story just doesn't fly.
We already decided to ramp up military spending in the Arctic region significantly, many billions of Danish crowns. But let's be frank, what have America done? They have closed over 30 bases in Greenland because they didn't find it military significant to be there, to the point where there is only one American base left. So if Trump thinks that a Danish security in Greenland is ridiculous, it just goes to the point that America doesn't care about the Arctic region because they decided unilaterally to draw back from Greenland to the point where their presence in Greenland is almost non-existent.
So the argument this is crucial to the United States national security doesn't seem particularly plausible. There could be other reasons, though, that make it strategically important to the United States. So Greenland borders a passage from the Arctic to the North Atlantic called the GI-UK gap, so Greenland, Iceland, UK, which runs between the UK, Iceland and Greenland. And that means it's sort of essential for controlling traffic into the North Atlantic. So it's an important shipping route, basically, and a shipping route that's getting busier as climate change makes the Arctic more navigable year on year. Climate change is also slowly melting Greenland's permanent ice sheet, making more of the island's rich troves of rare earth minerals, oil and gas accessible. It's the first of these that Trump may be eyeing up as he tries to wean the US off its reliance on Chinese rare earths for the production of microchips vital for AI and other tech products. This was former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace on the Today programme.
This is not about security. This is about Donald Trump wanting to thieve, basically, minerals and rights from Greenland. It's a bit like what we're seeing today in Venezuela, where oil is being taken from Venezuela. It's a price set by Donald Trump and sold to the United States itself. And all we seem to do is mince around in a sort of mealy-mouthed fashion. The reality is we have NATO. If the United States were to attack Greenland, or to try and take its sovereignty, first of all, it would be deceiving Greenland, because you can't just absorb a state in the Constitution of the United States. It has to go through a huge amount of process. So the Greenlanders won't get this promised land from Donald Trump anytime soon. And secondly, to attack another NATO member, which Denmark is, and a loyal member who supported them in 9/11 and sent troops to Afghanistan, would very much signal the demise of a large part of NATO.
That was a former defense secretary. Ash, I suppose what's a bit embarrassing about all of this, I mean, we haven't got so many Keir Starmer clips in the show today. I'm sure our audience aren't too disappointed about that. But if you compare sort of how anyone who's remotely rational speaks about sort of Trump's threats to Greenland, and even there, the former defense secretary was reasonably honest about the intentions when it comes to Venezuela, it's just a million miles from what any actual serving politician in Europe says, because they're all just terrified. So Keir Starmer sort of says, we stand with her about the Prime Minister of Denmark, but he won't really say anything about Trump or what his intentions are or how irresponsible this is. When it comes to Venezuela, Keir Starmer is still pretending that this is all about a transition to democracy, even though Donald Trump has made it incredibly clear that he doesn't give a damn how Venezuela is governed so long as he gets the oil. So there's a couple of questions. Do you think the US will actually take Greenland? And, how should European leaders respond? Because on one level, it looks sort of humiliating and weak when they're so unwilling to sort of call by name what is going on. At the same time, I suppose you could say, you don't want to unnecessarily provoke Donald Trump because he will follow through.
I mean, just on for the first point on will Donald Trump take Greenland? I mean, I think you have to seriously entertain it as a possibility. And there's also the chance that what Donald Trump wants to do is use the threat of military action immediately after having violated the sovereignty of a neighboring country so profoundly in order to force some kind of sweetheart deal on minerals and fossil fuels, which would be to the detriment of the people of Greenland and the Danish government, and entirely to the benefit of Donald Trump, his cronies, and his government, right? That's one way in which you can see this playing out. But one thing that I would say is that one of the mistakes that it's very easy to make with Donald Trump is not to take him seriously and not to think that he has a kind of coherent worldview. Actually, he has a completely coherent strategy in this regard. I think it's monstrous. I think it's disgusting, but there is a coherence here, and I'll tell you why. So you mentioned rare earth minerals, and as you pointed out, Michael, Greenland's a rich source of rare earth minerals of the kind that China dominates in terms of global markets. Rare earth minerals and Chinese dominance when it comes to rare earth minerals, the centrality of rare earth minerals to all sorts of sections of the global economy and the US economy meant that in the trade negotiations that happened in 2025, that was supposed to be Donald Trump's big moment of bringing everyone to heel because of his tariff regime, ultimately China came off pretty well, if not the better. And that's because of these rare earth minerals and also something which was so delicate that it didn't even come up at the trade negotiations, that the US is reliant on, more than 700, ingredients or components from China, which are utterly essential to basic medicines needed by the American people. So to put it bluntly, because of these two really essential streams of resources, China had him by the short and curlies. So I think that this move to take Greenland or possibly get some kind of sweetheart deal, it's entirely coherent with saying, well, I want to have a more powerful position vis-a-vis China next time there are some kind of trade negotiation. The second thing, and I've got to thank our colleague Aaron Bastani for making me aware of this particular piece of information, is that you look at Donald Trump and the American government more generally, including the previous administration, their efforts to onshore, in particular, semiconductor chip production, again, something that you need rare earth minerals for, it's not just about sort of weakening China. I think there's another world in which you can look at it, another way in which you can look at it, where it's Donald Trump getting ready for China to take Taiwan. So it's part of a sort of geopolitical reorientation of the US away from the Pacific potentially, and thinking, all right, well, we're going to have rare earths of our own. We're going to have semiconductor production capacity of our own. So the thing that Aaron made me aware of was that TSMC was constructing factories in Phoenix, Arizona, which, when completed, will be able to meet the entire US domestic consumption needs for semiconductor chips, which is absolutely astonishing. That it seems to me that there are quite serious thoughts about, okay, when China takes Taiwan, what's going to happen next? So I think that the US is trying to get itself in the best possible position for that. Finally, I suppose the thing to consider when it comes to Europe, I do believe that there is a part of Donald Trump's brain which goes, well, you've suckled at the teat of U.S. military spending, for however many decades. The U.S. has essentially underwritten the entirety of European defense policy. Sorry, and I think that there is a weird part of him which is like, well, I should get an island in return for that. I do think that that's kind of how his brain works as well.